Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The conference I am about to give you today is quite painful. It is the culmination of years of reflection, of questioning, of doubt. It is both the result of a long period of disillusionment and a conviction rooted in the depth of my conscience that we should never build the kingdom of God upon lies. And if someone endorses lies, believing he may defend the church in such a way, in the end he is always the one who really hurts and destroys the church from within. Believing that we can condone evil, that it happens sometimes that the end justifies the means, that we do not make an omelette without breaking eggs, is a nonsense and an insult to the Spirit of Christ, which is always on the side of the victims, the poor, and the little ones. Christ called his disciples to walk in his footsteps, in the truth, always in the truth, even if it hurts our pride, even if it is shameful, even if it contradicts the very image that we have of the church. You do not defend the honor of the church in hiding its flaws, but in assuming its faults and acting in righteousness and truth. For many, it is unacceptable to admit that people call themselves victims of the church. This statement would have too heavy consequences, so they prefer to look away and hope that the so-called victims may be good victims. And a good victim is a victim who is silent. I'm not a good victim, and that's why I refuse to be silent. George Orwell in 1984 described a world bending under the yoke of the worst dictatorships in history. The central pillar of this dictatorship depended on the sinister work done by the Ministry of Truth, in charge of constantly rewriting its own history. By controlling all publications, all books, all history textbooks, the power that be, the Angsoc, ensure their blamelessness, their influence on consciousness, and their sustainability. In the 50s, the private secretaries of Father Maciel, the founder of the Legion of Christ, had already noticed with amazement the propensity of the latter to rewrite his own history and the history of his group, in order to always appear as a saint, as a hero, and to create a kind of mystical and providential atmosphere among his followers. Being able to lie is the first step in the art of manipulation. Maciel needed to arouse the admiration of his flock to get total submission from them. He began his congregation with a group of children from 10 to 11 years old. A child is always easier to manipulate than an adult. When I was in the Legion of Christ, the lies about the life of Father Maciel were circulating under the aspect of extraordinary secret that we were not allowed to share with anybody, but that would be released one day after his death. It seems that Father Maciel knows the date of his own death. It seems that Father Maciel had apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary, just like Saint Bernadette. It seems that Father Maciel fought against the demon, as did Saint Jean-Marie Vianney, the cure of Ars. It seems that Father Maciel has performed a couple of miracles along his life. It seems that Father Maciel can read the consciousness, the consciences of people just like reading an open book. Father Maciel sometimes disappeared for a couple of weeks or even a couple of months. This is because he has received a second call from the Lord, a very special call. He disappeared to serve the poor and to fulfill other mission for the church. But hush, Father Maciel is very humble, and he does not want to talk about that. One day after his death, the whole truth will be revealed, and finally we will know all his wonderful deeds and miracles. Beside all these rumors that created around the figure of the founder an aura of holiness, there was also the official historical lies invented by Father Maciel or by his most faithful disciples. Thus, Maciel used to tell the story of his close friend, a young martyr of the Cristero War, the blessed José Luis Sanchez del Rio. He counted with many details the agony of this young man who died for not having agreed to apostatize his Catholic faith. As he was a child, he was wondering why his friend José Luis had received the grace to become a martyr, but not him. Maciel counted also how, as a young seminarian, he had intervened as a mediator during a revolt in Orizaba, because people were demanding the reopening of the churches and were prohibited to do so. Thanks to his negotiation for peace, he avoided a bloodbath. But, of course, everything was lies. Everything. Father Maciel was a psychopath, without scruples, and he spent his life lying to defraud people who wanted to take their money, lying to manipulate his followers, lying to convince children under his care to get masturbation, lying to hide his double life, lying to always appear as a poor victim. After several years of investigation, the Vatican decided it was better to move on and not dwell on this past. Let it all rest in God's hands. We shall not judge Father Maciel. And that's how the Church has chosen to assume the lies of Father Maciel. The only difference is that nowadays they try not to speak too much about the founder. It became a kind of mystery. Today, in 2015, several years after the investigation of the Vatican, we still find on the French website of Wikipedia the lies of Father Maciel about his own history and the origins of the religious order. It says, for instance, that the young Maciel, as he was 16 years old, received on June 5th of 1936, the day of the Feast of the Sacred Heart, the divine inspiration to found a congregation devoted to the Sacred Heart. We can also read all the other lies I mentioned earlier. Or still more incredible, it says that in 1938, Maciel had been expelled out of the seminary because his superior were against his project of foundation, when in fact he had brought children into the seminary and been caught sexually abusing them. When we know the devious mind of Father Maciel, who was a pathological liar, can we give any credit to his fairy tales? Do you really think that God would have called a polymorphous pervert, a child rapist, and a swindler without scruple to found a religious order dedicated to educate young boys? Yet, serious studies have been made, including by a Mexican academic, Fernando González, who had access to hundreds of secret documents. His investigations have allowed him to replenish with startling accuracy not only the setbacks of this flawed man, and his cult-like group, but also to show how long 70 years of existence the Vatican, along 70 years of existence, the Vatican received hundreds of letters of denunciations written by victims, by ex-members, by teachers, by priests, and even by bishops. Just reading these documents gives nausea. They knew everything and have never done anything. They even made inquiries and established a list of all the lies, abuses, and crimes of Father Maciel. But as the conclusions of this investigation did not fit with their will, well, they buried them and decided to whitewash the founder. The dysfunctions were coming from the upper echelons of the church, who were fascinated by this young founder capable of inspiring so many vocations, of having so much success in his apostolic work. So the charges could not be true. You understand here the tragedy of this kind of reasoning. If the church authorities decide from the beginning that all complaints raised against the founder are slanderous, then the founder enjoys a total impunity. It is not so much a presumption of innocence that is given to the founder, but a presumption of slander that is given to the victims. How many lives were shattered because of that? When the revelation about the double life of Father Maciel finally came out on February 4th of 2009, we discovered little by little the whole truth despite the Legion's efforts to cover up the scandal. It was then said that Pope Benedict was personally working on the issue and was about to clean out the audience tables. Some Catholic journalists depicted him as the hero who had had the courage to punish Maciel and to face all the network of corruption among the Roman Curia. At this time, I confess that I also believed it naively. I was personally convinced that the Pope could not manipulate, nor produce a false inquiry. Why? Because the Pope is a Pope, so he should be inspired by God in some ways. A Pope cannot lie nor cheat. That's impossible. Alas, I was wrong. The main argument for claiming the integrity of Pope Benedict is based on an anonymous testimony telling that one day some member of the congregation tried to give Cardinal Ratzinger a wad of cash that he immediately refused. But this is a legend. The way corruption works in the Legion of Christ is more subtle than that. Legionnaires of Christ are not so stupid as to give a wad of cash to the most feared of the Roman Curia cardinal, known for his integrity and incorruptibility. The truth is that Cardinal Ratzinger has always been a great admirer of the Legion of Christ, and we have all the reasons to think that he was one of those who blocked the investigations for years. In 1998, the former victims of Father Maciel have filed a canonical complaint to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. But Cardinal Ratzinger opposed to deal with this issue, as testified a bishop who came to support the cause of the victims in 1999. Cardinal Ratzinger replied that Father Maciel was very appreciated by Pope John Paul II and had done so much good to the Church, and therefore it was not prudent to open a trial against him. In the summer of 2000, as I was a novice in Italy, I spent 1 month in Rome with my community. One day I remember that the superior came to us with a great revelation. Cardinal Ratzinger had come incognito in the new center of the Legion. This center is a huge, ultra-modern center intended as a showcase to seduce the Roman authorities. The secretary of the cardinal, who was a friend of the legionaries, had made a call to the superior of the center to tell him what happened during the visit. He told us that Cardinal Ratzinger had made 2 comments. I have to change my concept of miracle. Here begins the Counter-Reformation. For Cardinal Ratzinger, the Legion of Christ was the future of the Church, the starting point of the new evangelization called to fight the battle against the dictatorship of relativism. Yet, the Cardinal was discreet, surprisingly discreet. I think his fascination with the Legion blinded him. Despite having at his disposal a huge file containing hundreds of letters of accusation, he chose not to intervene. Let me show you a summary of this file. It comes from the secret archives of the Vatican that a group of religious leaked out of disgust by the attempts of the church leader to cover up the scandal and to protect the Legion of Christ. As you can see, the letters of accusations appear in blue and the letters of support in red and orange.
Accusations in blue?
In blue.
Wow.
The latter were usually asked by Maciel himself to his disciples in order to neutralize the critics, the orange one. In the book Light of the World, Pope Benedict said, "Unfortunately, we addressed these things very slowly and late. Somehow, they were concealed very well, and only around the year 2000 did we have any concrete clues." Only around the year 2000 did we have any concrete clues. Among the 212 documents making up the file, about a third are letters of denunciation of the crimes and lies of Father Maciel, starting until 1946 until 2002. All that the Vatican has ever done was to please him to retire to a life of prayer and penance in 2006, after about 60 years of denial and protection. And by the way, Maciel fulfilled neither the prayer nor the penance. He died in 2008, surrounded by his followers in the United States, without having acknowledged his crimes and without having asked forgiveness. The proponents of the rewriting of history explain, "Ha, look, Pope Benedict has made justice. He condemned Maciel." But please, stop telling nonsenses. Pope Benedict gave Maciel a tap on the fingers. If a robber enters your house, steals your property, violates and beats your children, will you accept of justice to tell the robber, "That's not nice, please say your prayers"? Where is the justice here? Maciel has ruined families, destroyed entire lives. We are talking about life destroyed, and we are told, "Please be good victim, shut up and admire the judge is right." Are you kidding? Victims need justice, and they never have been seriously hurt by the church. While Cardinal Ratzinger received the canonical complaint in 1998, nothing changed into the order until 2009. During these 11 years, thousands of legionaries of Christ and members of reigning priesthood kept devoting a cult to the founder, learning the legend about his life and reading his writing with the most holy devotion. In 2009, an apostolic visitation was announced in the Legion of Christ. We were told, "That's it, do not worry, Pope Benedict is acting and will soon get rid of the corruption. You can trust him, he knows what he's doing." But this visit began very strangely. Indeed, nothing was stopped. I mean, when you discover that the founder of one of the most influential religious orders in the Vatican has been found to be a criminal, a child rapist who lived several lives under multiple identities, had several children with several women, who took drugs and had even raped his own children, it seems to me that common sense would say, "Stop, we were wrong. We were completely wrong about this man, so there's maybe something that we did not understand about the congregation. Do not take the risk to train young boys in a flawed congregation. Stop the recruitment. Stop priestly ordination. Until we know for sure that the environment is really safe." But this is not what has been done. Nothing has been stopped. A former legionary who was still in the congregation at this time confessed us that the apostolic visitor told him, "Do not quit. The Pope believes in the Legion. He wants to save the congregation. We need you to rebuild the congregation." Vatican expert Sandro Magister, who is a great admirer of Pope Benedict, had entered into a very perverse game, trying to give the impression of being on the side of the victims. He played the intermediaries and turned out to be a kind of hypnotist, launching false hopes, giving aberrant interpretations on what was going on with the work of the Pope Benedict. "Do not worry, the Pope knows what he's doing. He's placing his men and removing bad people. He's cleaning out the congregation." Woe to you, Sandro Magister, because you prevented consciences to rebel, and you played a sinister role in the historical imposture of this apostolic visitation. Among the 5 bishops sent by the Vatican to investigate, only one was commissioned to meet the victims of Father Maciel, Bishop Riccardo Vatti Urquidi, who was a sick old bishop, who died a few months after the visit. He looked depressed, told me one of the victims. He listened with half an ear, without taking notes. When the apostolical visitation was announced, I immediately contacted one of the investigators, Bishop Blasquez. I just wanted to be heard. I also sent him a list of 10 individuals and families who had the same desire. There were their names, email addresses, telephone numbers, and we waited. Alas, we never been contacted. We later learned that Bishop Blasquez had gone to France, telling people that Pope Benedict had recognized the charism of the congregation and did not find it useful to meet us. Why carry out an investigation when its conclusions have already been decided? Some friends asked also the territorial director of the Legionaries of Christ to be notified of the upcoming visit of the investigator, but oh damn, he forgot to call them. What bad luck. Curiously, he did not forget to call some other families who were completely in blissful awe of the Legion of Christ to make them meet the investigator of the Vatican? It is not so difficult to manipulate an apostolical visitation. You just need to arrange it so that investigators only encounter people under your influence, and to remove or discredit any critics. Maciel played this part throughout his whole life, and legionaries have learned from him. In 2010, after the false apostolic investigation, Pope Benedict appointed Bishop Velasio de Paulis to guide the congregation in the process of renovation. During a conference, Cardinal de Paulis, faced with the despair of a large number of members, confessed that Pope Benedict was the one who saved the congregation despite all the heavy judgments and conclusions of the investigation. The same year, the papal delegate wrote a long letter to the Legionaries of Christ in which he said, "There has been a decrease in the promotion of vocations. In such cases, the problems come from the parents who, amid the great vortex of the media, did not know enough to discern between truth and falsification. Unfortunately, in this whirlpool of public opinions, some legionaries were carried away and renounced to work on recruitment for the legion. So, after 70 years of blindness and denial, the church leaders discovered suddenly that Father Maciel was actually an horrible child abuser, an unscrupulous crook, a drug addict, a conman, and criminal. And despite all these late revelations, what is the representative of the Holy See telling us? He is accusing the religious who have simply asked to wait for a serious investigation before recruiting children in the order. Woe to you, Cardinal de Paulis! Woe to you for your blindness and the hardness of your heart. Most French journalists who has worked on this case contacted me to get some information for their investigations. One of them, from an important Catholic newspaper, thanked me immensely for all my work and for the help I gave to him. He told me I was a very courageous person and he encouraged me to write a book. His article was quite good, even if he was still defending Pope Benedict. As evidences were accumulating against the role of Pope Benedict, I sent an email to this journalist to share my doubts about the Holy Father. Since then, he no longer addressed me. When a TV report in which I actively participated was broadcast on the French channel Canal+, he did not put a single word in his newspaper. When I published my testimony by Flammarion in 2013, he did not write a single word. Woe to you because you have trampled the truth and trampled the victims. Woe to you because you have led God's people into error. Woe to you because you have not been able to be the prophet who could make a difference and raise awareness among Catholics. On January 31st, 2011, Cardinal de Paulis set up an outreach commission to victims for examining complaints of victims of Father Maciel and to conduct any compensation. But 1 year later, he expresses its most scathing contempt for these victims. On our way, we met other problems and difficulties. The problem, so to speak, of the victims of Father Maciel. We thought it was useful to give a contribution to end this case. But we cannot spend all the money of the Legion of Christ to answer the excessive demands of those seeking compensation. Excessive demands, but this is only a question of justice. We're speaking about young boys who were caught in the nets of an organization that lied to them, that manipulated them. They escaped completely destroyed after undergoing sexual and psychological abuses during 10 or 20 years. And then when they decided to fight for truth and justice, they were slandered, threatened. They lived in terror for years simply for having told the truth. And you call them problems? And what, you think it is enough to distribute a few dollars to get rid of the problem? Last year, my great friend Paul Lennon went to meet the victims of Father Maciel in Mexico. Here is what he shared on his blog. When I asked González Parga why he wouldn't meet with the outreach commission to victims set up by Cardinal de Paulis, he reminded me that 4 legionaries, including superiors handpicked by Maciel such as Father Cocura and Florencio Sanchez Soler, were sitting on the board of 6 examining the legitimacy of the claims. It is so humiliating. Why should I subject myself again to my abusers in order to seek compensation, clearly due in all justice? Francisco and Maria Esther are a good example of the plight of many aging former legionaries. While presently solvent, they have a lot of catching up to do financially. At retirement age, they must continue to work full-time. They do not have pensions, health insurance, or protection against for unforeseen crises in their later years. They have paid out of pocket for costly medical interventions, but there are other survivors who are even less fortunate. In March 2012, Pope Benedict traveled to Mexico for a pastoral visit. The victims of Maciel hoped that Pope would receive them, and they sent a formal request to the Nunciature. In vain. So strange. Pope Benedict had received victims of sexual abuse in all his previous trips, but he refused to receive the victims of Father Maciel, that many historians consider to be the most terrible case of clerical sexual abuses in the history of the Church. The process of rewriting of history is a surprising mechanism. It can go very far beyond the Christian press. The story I'm going to tell you is perhaps the one that hurt me the most. I have no anger against Father Maciel. After all, he was ill and should have been stopped 1,000 times. But I admit I feel nauseous when I discovered how some media rewrite history to please their readers, or to please the Roman hierarchy, or for some other reasons. In 2013, I published my book in which I simply told my story and explained my disappointment regarding the role of the Roman authorities in general and Pope Benedict in particular. A few days after the release of my book, I was contacted by a journalist from a very important news agency. She had read my book and she was very moved. She told me that this book was terrible. We spent 2 hours on the phone and I gave her all the information she needed. If this news agency could release a strong article about my book, then it would make a lot of noise. So I waited for the article 1 week, 2 weeks, and then the journalist called me back. What a shame, it was already too late to make a topical. She explained that she had been ill, but she was still willing to support my cause by writing an article. And a few days later, her article was published, but it made no noise, for a simple reason. The journalist had removed all my charges and told the exact opposite of what I had written in my book. That night, I cried. I did not imagine that we could manipulate and lie to this point on matter of such gravity. Specifically, her article was a review of my book. The title of the article was the title of my book, Moi, ancien légionnaire de Christ. The first part took up just a few descriptions of life in the Legionary of Christ, but nothing very new. In the middle of the article, the journalist announced that dozens of legionaries deserted the rank. Yet I had explained to her that we were several thousand, and we had even lists. In the second part of the article, the journalist did not make any mention of my conclusions about the role of Pope Benedict, but worse, she resumed the official version of the Church and explained that Pope Benedict was a real hero, the first who dared to take action against Maciel, and the one of the few who refused all attempts at corruption. What is the most shocking is that it is not here a question of freedom of the press. If the article would be an investigation presenting contradictory arguments, it would be okay for me. But here it is different. It is a review of my book. People who read this article thought I was agree with this rewriting of history. As the article was translated into Spanish, I had to write to the victims of Father Maciel, who fought for years against the Ratzinger administration, to present my excuses and explain that the journalist had not given my conclusions. When I sent her a message sharing my disillusion, she answered a kind of, "You are defending the freedom of conscience? Please give your reader the possibility to use their free will. Anyway, I'm helping you to sell your book, so please, be grateful. Be a good victim, shut up." So disgusting. What have you done? This is a serious professional fault. You could have at least outlined my conclusions before giving the official explanations of the Church. Woe to you, because you have once again trampled the victims and the truth. After that, the pseudo-historians launched the process of rewriting of history. It's incredible, absolutely incredible, but they did it. They did it. Get out of here, I am here, and I am about to tell you the truth. And they rewrite history. One of them even wrote a book citing several pages of my book, without asking me for permission, by the way. Then explain how Pope Benedict had managed this case with so much justice and wisdom. Woe to you, unscrupulous scribes and Pharisees, who rewrite history for your own interest. By trampling the truth and trampling victims, you are trampling Christ. In January 2014, the Legion of Christ reached the end of its process of renewal. We were a bit surprised when we learned that the Vicar General of the congregation, with a ornate tone, wrote a beautiful letter to the former legionaries, asking them to give their opinions on these reforms. The congregation did all it could during a couple of years to prevent us from intervening in the process of reform, and then this letter. But once again, they tried to fool us. This letter was released 2 or 3 weeks before the beginning of the general chapter, a council that will ratify the reforms. That way, nobody could have time to answer seriously, and the legionaries could claim they had been listening to former legionary members. Moreover, I received that letter by chance, thanks to an ex-member from Mexico who was still in touch with me. Legion superiors have not sent me this letter. But that does not matter. I have answered them anyway. I took several days and nights to send them a long letter in which I told, you say that you have changed, that you have repented. Well, good. Prove it. And I sent them a number of specific questions on different subjects. How the congregation deals now with former members. Will the Legion publish all the real statistics of the congregation, including the number of departures, of depressions, and even suicides? How does the Legion deal with her founder, Father Maciel, and with her history? What about victims of Father Maciel? The other cases of sexual abuses in the Legion? What about the way the Legion handled the apostolic visitation? What about the relationship of the Legion of Christ with those who criticize her? What about recruitment and discernment in the congregation, and so on? The response of the Legion was always contemptuous silence. This is the technique of the steamroller. Now people may wonder how can a theologian of the caliber of Pope Benedict could accept without explanation that a man whose life was beyond morality may have found a good community. His conclusion is preventing any solution to the problem of cultic aberrations. Do not destroy the enthusiasm of youth. That is the argument we keep hearing all the time. But the enthusiasm justifies nothing. Many join the Communist Party with enthusiasm for a good work, the construction of a classless society. Having saved the Legion of Christ, Pope Benedict has saved all the congregation corrupt. For if the Legion, the worst of all, was saved, what about other congregations that would deserve to be dissolved? Yet, in government, the Pope is not infallible. If the Pope is manipulated, if the Pope gets blinded by appearances, succumbs to the temptation to encourage and support flawed communities, the true Christian who loves the Church and who is consistent with his faith in Christ cannot remain silent. I thank you.